Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we have Riku of the Two Reflections, a Tim deck. This deck comes to us from Anonymous, who says, my deck is a Tim deck. Creatures tap to do damage and untap other things, but I feel like that's all it does. I feel like it lacks powerful enough interactions. Personally, I feel like it's a 5 out of 10 deck. I'll send a case of beer for you if you help me make it an 8 out of 10. They have no budget, and I don't know if that's something we can do here. We're gonna have a bit of a conversation on power level during this video and a way to understand it and, understand how we improve decks. But the deck itself has some avenues that we can improve it, at least strengthen it in a few directions without making it lose its theme. As always, this deck list is in the video description below. And I would be very happy if you went and you take a look at it. This is a Tim deck. I am not one of the players that particularly played with Tim, which I believe is Prodigal sort a Pyromancer. No, that's the red one, right? It's Prodigal Sorcerer? Who is the original Tim? I believe it's a 3 mana turn. I don't even think it's in here. Oh no, they're not in order, so maybe it is here. Interesting. I'll have to take a look. But the main idea of the original one is you have creatures that tap to do things, and then you take advantage of that tapping in order to. There we go. Let's go by converted mana cost. That's going to make a lot more sense in my brain. So let's see, 3 mana. Yeah, I don't think it's here. Okay, that's fine. Um, so this is a deck where we're trying to tap creatures down, deal damage. This isn't the kind of deck that I'm very aware of. I never grew up with, the traditional Tim. I was too young to be playing Magic. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't have feelings of like nostalgia for it. So sometimes these kind of decks miss me a little bit. But I love a good theme. And the theme here is pretty straightforward. So if someone has a little more connection, knows Tim decks, I've seen a few here and there. And if you look at this deck and you have ideas, I would love for you to take a moment, comment in the comment section, give some advice, help me out here as we can all work together to make this the best version of the deck that we can. So, Riku of the Two Reflections. Who are they, and why are we using them to be our commander of a Tim deck? Well, Riku of the Two Reflections is one of the first commanders, I believe, that was printed for the purpose of being a commander. It is a human wizard 2/2, 5 mana in, I think this is Temur, blue, green, red. And it says, whenever you cast an instant sorcery, you can also pay a blue and a red, and then you'll make a copy of it. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay a blue and a green to make a copy of it. I imagine in this deck, that second one is a lot more important than the first one, because then you can kind of create a very, very large number of these Tim creatures in order to make, you know, a legion of tapping, untapping, and make the most of it. I think that part makes total sense to me. So if we look over here, we have the curve. I think the curve is pretty fine. There's a lot of 5 drops here. I think there's 5 of them. I don't know if tapped out counts as our commander in that. I assume it does. But since they're 5 drops, they're all going to be very, very powerful. So I don't really have much of a problem there. The rest of the curve works great. I feel like there's a lot of 3s, but I think that's also in the nature of what what the Tim creature is a 3 mana creature that taps for an ability. So it does make sense that we're going to be a little inflated at the 3 mana slot. So looking at this deck, I think there is a very clear and concise kind of direction we can go in to improve the deck. And unfortunately, it's not the most interesting direction, but it will be the first direction to improve the power level of the deck. And we're going to go into that power level talk a bit later. I just want to generally start by talking about the deck. And the general thing is this. We have a mana problem, right? We have 33 lands, which is low, especially for a 5 mana commander. And we have very, very strict mana requirements. You might look at something like, let's see, Prodigal Pyromancer, and say, well, that's not particularly strict. That's 2 red. To anything, 1 red, we can make that happen. But I'm going to suggest that's not actually the casting cost of Prodigal Pyromancer, because the dream is we're casting Prodigal Pyromancer after we have Riku out, and we're going to add a blue and a green to that cost. All of a sudden, Prodigal Pyromancer is 5 mana to create 2 Prodigal Pyromancers. So, with that in mind, we have to note that almost all of our cards are 3 colors, and almost all of them are very, very high mana cost. So I think we need to take that in mind and look at this deck in the way, how do we make this more ramp oriented? The first thing is, like I said, we have too few lands. We need to up the lands to close to 40. I am usually not a person that goes all the way to 40, but I think we should at least get to like 38, 37, something around there, because we need to be able to hit our land drops to naturally ramp out. The next thing we need is ramp. You can see in our sorcery, the only sorcery spell we play is Green Sun Zenith, which means no nature lores, no rampant growths, no Farseeks, no Kodama's Reaches, anything like that. We should be playing these. We should absolutely playing some number of these cards. In the same way, if we look at artifacts, we have Soul Ring. Of course we do. We always do. But then what's our next mana ramp? It's Thran Dynamo and then Gilded Lotus. Thran Dynamo is the opposite of something that we want in a deck like this, right? We have a strict color requirement. It is not the amount of mana. In fact, if you look at Riku of the 2 reflections, Thran Dynamo can't even pay the full colorless cost. Sorry, it does pay the full colorless cost, but it's wasted after that fact, is what I'm trying to say. It only pays 2, right? And that's it of the 3 mana Thran Dynamo creates. The rest needs to be colored. In the same way, if we look at a number of cards here, we'll notice that almost all of them have more of a color requirement than a colorless requirement. That have that are over 3 mana, because these ones have more colorless, but then you're wasting mana from Thran Dynamo. If we come back to Riku though, and we add the blue and the green, well, Prodigal Pyromancer now is 5 mana, red, blue, green, 2 colorless. Well, Thran Dynamo is still only paying for that 2 colorless. And if we go to something like Fate Stitcher, where it does pay the full 3, well, that's pretty rare. We're still missing out on the blue and the green. So blue, blue, green is what we're missing. And when we unearth it, well, Thran Dynamo does nothing there. Another problem with the ramp that we have here is we look at Gilded Lotus. Well, Gilded Lotus taps for a single color of mana. This is kind of a problem here because, as you've noticed, Riku's ability requires a blue and a green. So sometimes that's really going to work out because you're going to pick a green creature or a blue creature, and therefore you're not going to notice that discrepancy as much. But with a red creature, you're going to have a bit of a problem because you're going to have to still have 2 other sources of that color. So Gilded Lotus doesn't particularly do what you want. In addition, Gilded Lotus is 5 mana, which is the same mana cost as our commander, which means we actually have to decide whether or not we want our commander or we want the Gilded Lotus. And even then, the turn after, when we go and we play Riku, then we play Gilded Lotus, well, we only have 3 remaining mana, maybe a 4th with the land that we have played that turn. Unlikely at 33 lands, but you could. And then what are you going to cast with that 4 mana to take advantage of Riku? There's just not a lot of options. In fact, there's almost no instants and sorceries to take advantage of the instants or sorcery spell line of Riku, which I think is fine. I don't think that's a problem. It's very clear what we're here for, so we can just ignore that text and move on. I think that's fine. But what we need to do is we need to increase ramp. Now, there's a lot of directions we can do this in. The most flavorful direction is to add 1 mana creatures that tap for mana, Birds of Paradise, and the like. Birds of Paradise taps for any color, Gilded Goose taps for any color every time it has a food. Any 1 mana green elf that taps for green is equally fine here. They do the fun thing your deck wants to do where you tap creatures and they start paying for your spells. So I think that's particularly strong. But at the same time, I still want some artifacts and or sorceries in order to ramp a little further. Now, looking here at our lands, we have to add some more, but we do have shocks and we do have duels. So playing cards like Farseek and the like, which are looking for your Nature's Lore would be the other one, where it's looking for a forest or a card that's not a forest, it's naming the card type. That means that could grab our Volcanic Island, right? Not Nature's Lore, but the other one can. And Tropical Island can be grabbed by either of those. So the first few Farseeks, Nature Lores, the like of those, I think 3 Visits is the other one. Those are really, really good. Those are a good place to start. After which, the next few should be Signets, I believe. Now, our Signets are really good in a deck like this. Arcane Signet obviously is the strongest one because it taps for any color in a 3-color deck, but the other ones are equally strong because they allow us to fix our mana. But you might note that one is stronger than the rest. And if you've guessed it, you're correct. It is Simic Signet, because Simic Signet turns any color into Riku's ability cost, right? With 1 mana and Simic Signet, you can make that token copy of any creature you have entering the battlefield. So I think that one is the strongest one, and you don't have to play the other 3 as much, the other 3 being Izzet Signet, Gruul Signet, these 3 right here, but you have to at least play Simic Signet. And I do recommend the other 2 as well. Likewise, the talismans we have down here, Talisman of Creativity, Talisman of Curiosity, and Talisman of Impulse are our 3 talismans we can play, with Curiosity, once again, just being a little better because the colors we care about the most are green and blue. I think you should absolutely play all 3 Signets, and I think you should consider playing at least 2 of the 3 talismans, because I think it's going to be a big boon for you to be able to cast the spells you want. After which, that's a big after which. I'm not going to speed right through that. That is a lot of cards we need to add. That is a lot of cards that we need to add so that your deck can play, right? Right now, our mana problem, all we can really do in this deck is cast our first bunches of cards on curve, right? And unfortunately, one of the things about the cards that we're casting is they're not particularly strong. This is when we're going to take a moment to have the power level discussion. There's nothing wrong with having a deck with weaker creatures. I want to make that clear. I try to make that as clear as much that if you want to build a lower power commander deck, that can be a lot of fun. Here we don't build decks to increase the power level. We build decks to increase its success rate. And by that, I mean its rate of doing what it intends to do. What this deck intends to do is put out a bunch of creatures that can tap and use them together to win games or to create big board presence. I think the ultimate fun a deck like this can kind of have is, getting 2 copies of Riku of my goodness, sorry, of Seedborn Muse using Riku of the 2 Reflections, so that on every untap step you have 2 untap triggers on each of your opponent's untap steps. So you can tap everything down to do an effect, tap, do a bunch of damage, counter spells, or whatever you like. You go to your opponent's turn, they all untap, the 2 triggers go on the stack, you can tap them all again, untap them, tap them all again, untap them, and then you have them untapped for the rest of the turn. Like, that is so powerful and puts you so far ahead. Now, is this a really, really strong deck? No, because the objective truth of it is that Seedborn Muse becomes a 7-mana card to do this. And though the effect is really, really strong, some of the cards that you're using with that effect, such as Prodigal Pyromancer, is just not really going to do anything. You're probably going to ping down your opponent's creatures, which will vary from being very good to just okay. there's a possibility that at this power level, your opponents are just dropping 8/8s with like no abilities or like hexproof, and then something like Prodigal Pyromancer really doesn't do anything. Is that a problem? No. But if you're going to ask me to bring this to a power level of 8, which is traditionally when I start considering things like, tutors, infinite combos, really expensive cards, I don't think we can do that without fundamentally disassembling the Tim package, right? And I don't want to do that because this is the fun of the deck. So unfortunately, you're going to have to keep your case of beer because I can't make this into an 8 out of 10 deck. But what I can do is help you make this into a successful deck where you feel like you're able to move towards getting Seedborn Muse out and making a clone of it every game, where you get to feel like you're doing the really, really fun thing of using all, like, Empress Galena several times in a turn cycle and stealing all your opponent's creatures, because that is a lot of fun. With that in mind, coming back to kind of what I feel like we should be adding as well is two cards that I often find myself adding in green decks these days is Crashing Drawbridge, which taps to give all your creatures haste, and likewise, not Cascading Cataracts, it is Concordant Crossroads, all creatures of haste. Both of these cards are haste enablers. I like either of them in your deck. You're already playing Anger, which, to note, how many mountains are you playing? You're playing 2 mountains in Anger. So I like these cards more than Anger because Anger's kind of tricky for your deck to set up. You don't have that many fetch lands and you have not that many mountains, but Concordant Crossroads and Crashing Drawbridge both enable for your Tim abilities to activate immediately, right? I think you also have it redundantly with Thousand Year Elixir in your artifacts, which is a really good inclusion. But I think these two will just help the deck just go a little further. Because once again, your goals are to play like you want to play Arcanus the Omnipotent, and you want to use that ability right away. It's such a strong ability that it will put you so far ahead that you don't want to wait an entire turn cycle because there's just a really high chance that Arcanus will be, removed from play, or you'll have to bounce him back into your hand and try again the next turn. However, if you have the haste enablers, you're going to find that you can go do it right away. So I think those should belong in there as well. Lightning Greaves is already in here. I think you should also play the other version, Swiftfoot Boots, where you can give one creature haste. Now it still has one. It's not 0 to equip like Lightning Greaves, but 1 instead. However, I think that's fine. Your main like not the main problem of the deck, but the main constraint of the deck right now is its ability to make mana. So if we're going to kick that into overdrive and put a lot of ramp in, I think we're going to benefit. Like, we're not going to mind things like Swiftfoot Boots costing 1 mana. I think we're going to be able to get ahead. I will note, I like Rhystic Study here. I think it's a fine card in here. I like Cryptolith right here because it enables all of your creatures to tap for mana, which I think is nice. I don't think that stops me from wanting to add 1 mana Mana Dorks because I think they're just going to be very, very good here. Okay. I think these are generally the kind of directions I want you to go into to start with. Now, here's the problem, right? The problem is I've introduced a bunch of things that I want you to add. We're going to have to cut some cards. And outside of a few cards that kind of stand out, such as Thran Dynamo and Gilded Lotus, I think those can both be cut. A few cards here and there that are also like the ramp of Market Festival just needs to be at lower mana, so this card can be cut for ramp. So those ones are easy. We still need to add lands and we still need to add ramp. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to cut out of our creatures, right? And so this is a little tricky because what we have here is a form of a tribal deck. And I'm going to give you the advice that I always give in tribal decks. There's this need to put as many versions of this ability, and unfortunately, we're going to have to lose some. So we're going to need to get a little picky. Now, that's not the worst problem because you're already playing a card like Worldly Tutor, which looks for a creature, right? So cards like that enable us to play more cards that you know, that we find are stronger and dilute and like not have the need to have so many of that ability. Instead, we're going to have stronger ones and more reliability to casting them. So like Captain of the Mists is a card that I feel like you can cut because this is a lot of mana to activate. Its ability isn't particularly relevant that gets it untapped, and and it doesn't really combo with anything else in our deck. It is a cute card that lets us do really silly things, especially on our opponent's upkeep to tap down their lands, but otherwise, compared to the other ones, it just doesn't have the same kind of power. Let's see. At the same time, cards like Puppeteer, we have like Puppeteer and Tide Force Elemental are the same creature almost, right? They have reversed power and toughness, but Tide Force Elemental has an additional clause where you can untap it by playing a land. So I think I would prefer one to the other, right? I would cut the Puppeteer and keep the Tide Force Elemental. And so on and so forth. I don't want to go through every single one, but I think one of the main things you're going to have to think about is exactly which ones you're going to keep, which ones you're going to toss. Genesis and Anger are kind of strange for me here, the incarnations, because you don't have a reliable way to throw them in the graveyard outside of Fauna Shaman. So I find them to be weaker here, which is why I don't think I really want Anger, but I also don't want Genesis, so I think that's a nice little cut, especially because it's not even on theme, so I think it's easy to do. And like we're never casting this for 5, but taking an additional 3 mana per turn is particularly expensive. Hate Flare. Hate Flare is really, really close to being a good card here. I think we have to equip it with something so that we can tap it ourselves, right? Because right now, the trouble of tapping it with something else and then untapping it and dealing the damage, that's a lot of work for it to be not that strong. But if you can find a way to tap it by itself using something like Paradise Mantle, where you can tap it for a color each time, then it becomes incredibly strong, right? Because then you can stack Seaborn Muses or stack Hate Flare. Well, I guess you want to stack the Seaborn Muses instead. But with Hate Flare, you can start tapping them down and then using the mana you've made from it to start dealing 5 damage to a player each time. Like I think this is a really strong card at this power level of the deck, and I think you should lean towards these kind of cards. Now, I think I'm going to kind of end the deck assist here because I think this deck has a lot of changes to be made, and I don't want to suggest too many things to get it off course. I think right now this deck is at a point that we need to solidify its base, and its base right now is its mana cost. This deck is very very mana hungry, and so we have to invest into that mana because once this deck has the mana to function, it's incredibly powerful, right? Being able to make copies of every single one of these creatures literally doubles their power. And if you think it as a ratio kind of thing, where like let's look at Hate Flare again. Hate Flare does a lot of things for 7 mana. But if I told you you could get a 2 mana Hate Flare, wouldn't you say yes? Well, that's the power of Riku of the Two Reflections, right? Is that your second Hate Flare is only 2 mana. You just need that 9 mana to do it. And so, if we invest into the deck's mana base and we invest into the deck's ability to produce mana, all of these cards are just going to grow in power considerably. Now, can this deck be an 8 power deck? Probably not. But right now, we want it to be successful. We want it to be fun to play, and we want you to feel like every time you sit down with it, that the deck is operating intentionally and you feel like you're doing the thing you want to. I don't know where it's going to end up on that power level. I think it could safely make its way to the 7, the generic idea of what a commander deck is. I think this could make it there pretty easily. We're just going to need to start at the bottom and work our way up. So if you do send another draft, which I really hope you do, I would like to see a version with a stronger and more consistent mana base, which doesn't mean just fetch and shocks, right? It means the right number. It means ramp. It means making sure that your ramp supports the cards you want to cast. Put that together, and then we can go on to the next kind of few topics because we have thoughts also here about draw, about mana advantage, about board presence, about control. Right now, outside of our creatures, we don't really have a way to interact with the board, and that's something we should be thinking about as the deck progresses. But you know what they say about really long journeys is that they start with single steps. So let's start with a single step, start with the mana, and see where the deck goes. I hope this deck assist was useful to you. And like I said, I'd love to see the next draft. If you'd like to send me a draft of this deck or any deck, there is a form in the video description below that you can fill out to send it my way. And if you'd like to skip the lineup, there is a link down there too. As said before, our lineup is about 300 decks. Now, not all of those decks will be made into videos, but I have to go through them to find them. So I do understand if people want to skip the line and see their video right away. And as always, if you could do the like, comment, subscribe YouTube thing, I really do appreciate it. Our channel has been growing pretty steadily, and I want it to keep growing and support it in any way I can. I am interested to see more of Riku the Two Reflections. I think it's a commander that's really slept on, and I want to see this work for you, especially in a fun niche build like this. For some people it's a meme, but your meme decks can be good. They can be functional. They can work really well and be a lot of fun. And I think this deck has the potential of becoming that. So good luck, and I'm excited to see the next draft.